The 10th model that we're going to take a look at is the sociocultural model. Let me just get that up here. Um, so we've kind of gone from looking at individuals to looking at a slightly larger system like the family or your peer groups. And the sociocultural model takes it a little bit further. It talks a little bit about the influences of the larger community, the larger environment on a society's drinking patterns. So very simply, the level of alcohol consumption per capita usually is greater under certain conditions, like the availability of alcohol. The easier it is to get, the more likely you are to see a number of problem drinkers. It's also influenced by convenience of access, and it's influenced by things like legal regulations. I believe it was in an earlier video that I mentioned a little bit about drinking on Sundays. And originally, not being able to buy alcohol on Sunday was a way of controlling drinking behavior in the society. Originally originating from more religious beliefs than anything else. We used to call them blue nose laws. Blue noses were people that were better than you and me. There's other factors that influence drinking too, or at least that influence heavy drinking. You take a look at countries like Iceland or Russia, where there's poverty, where there's long periods of darkness, a lot of cold and that sort of thing. You'll see an awful lot of drinking. Russia has a horrible problem with alcoholism. We've also tried to, under the sociocultural, that larger thing, we've also tried to regulate drinking patterns and habits and problems by, for instance, limiting the amount people can drink in bars and restaurants. And believe you me, these days they pay quite a bit of attention to that. In the old days, you had some really drunk patron, they weren't going to cut you off. I mean, that was money in their pockets. But as soon as people start getting sued for being part of the problem, people would leave there drunk out of their minds, go driving and have an accident and kill or injure somebody. They suddenly started, the restaurants and bars suddenly started becoming part of the legal action that was being taken. I was a waiter back in the 80s, and we were taught even back then about how to recognize and deal with people that had been drinking too much. And if you know anything about alcoholics, they don't tend to take that very well. I know as a waiter I ran into an awful lot of them, and it was tricky to do. Our bosses didn't really like us cutting people off. So, in other words, it's influences from the larger environment, it's influences in the culture. Many cultures drink more than others. Probably the driest group of people would be traditional Jews, who don't approve of drinking. Irish, like myself, are always, they have that stereotype of heavy drinking, and I'm not sure how much of a stereotype it is, but that's the way it is. That's the way that it's thought of. So again, the example of sociocultural is the control or the lack of controls over consumption. So we're looking at the environment and the different cultural norms. By the way, gambling, legalized gaming is a good example of a changing culture. We always, as a society, looked down on gambling and tried to discourage it. But considering all the money there was to be made, and considering there's been a change in who we are, I think, over the decades and decades, gambling isn't thought to be such a horrible, immoral act anymore. So you see over the past couple of decades, quite the increase in gaming and casinos and that sort of thing. So interventions under this model is to control and influence the supply side. Don't make it quite so easy, don't make it quite so plentiful or so strong or anything else like that. There's a reason why stores in Minnesota sell 3.2 beer and not 12%. And another intervention is, of course, social policy. Policy are the laws that we make that govern how easy it is for people to get alcohol. By the way, to go back to gambling again for just a second, gambling is the only activity that's potentially addictive that's supported and pushed by the government. Any television watcher knows that the state puts out advertisements for the lottery, right? The Minnesota lottery, and you can't win if you don't play. But you'll never see, our government pushing you to drink more, to use more marijuana or anything else like that. Gambling's the only thing. That's a little difference in social policy. And the last is service provisions and interventions, meaning people who are trained to detect that maybe you've had too much and certainly try to put a stop to it. You've seen the commercials too where people are encouraging other people, friends don't let friends drive drunk. Whatever it takes, get those keys. And that's right. You should. So the intervention agents, well, it's the people who make the laws and can change the laws. So lobbyists, of course, try to work with legislators and the policymakers. Retailers who have to make the decision about serving alcohol, but it's a pretty rare business that's not going to want to sell alcohol. Social provision experts and practitioners, and so on. So this is just a bigger look, the look at the larger environment in the way that it influences individuals.